multi-sector. While it is very important, the number of capabilities when it comes to linking that with multi-sector, whether it is on military, transport, retail, or media, Dr. Helen is deeply committed to improving how weather information is communicated and acted upon. So without further delay, let me invite Dr. Helen to share your presentation and look forward to this exciting talk. Over to you, Helen.
Thank you very much. It's so lovely to be with you today, and thank you very much for the invitation. So I'm going to start with a brief introduction as to who I am and why I'm here talking to you about this topic today. So as was already said, I've been in the world of weather professionally for about 22 years now across a variety of different sectors. And most of that time has been in operational meteorology, so weather forecasting. And then about 5 years ago, I long story short, became very interested in how the social sciences could be integrated with the physical and natural sciences that we do so well in meteorology to better inform our products and services and to ultimately help people to make better decisions to stay safe. So I did a master's in psychology a good few years ago now and became the UK's first socio-meteorologist. And now half of my time is spent researching for a PhD in psychology on decision-making in the UK weather warning process. So let's just go back to basics for a moment. For some of you, this will be very familiar. For others, maybe not so. A bit of a 101 of psychology and behavioural economics. So traditional economic theory says that humans, or what's often termed econs, are rational actors who make optimal decisions based on calculated costs and benefits. So the idea for many, many decades was that people would make rational decisions based on cost-loss decision-making processes. And then psychology told us, well, actually, humans are ordinary people. We are imperfect, we're emotional, and we can be prone to biases. So was born the field of behavioural economics, which blends psychology and traditional economic theory to use assumptions that are closer to how people actually behave, how people make decisions in the real world. So just to go through a couple of definitions before we go to some examples. So a heuristic is a shortcut that we use to make decisions easier. It's suggested that we make about 35,000 decisions every single day. And so if we were to really think long and hard about every single one of those decisions, you can imagine that it would become very overwhelming, or it would, not enable us to make any decisions at all. So heuristics are vital. They're those shortcuts, those rules of thumb that we use. But the downside of heuristics is that they can lead to cognitive biases. So these are repeated patterns of thinking that can lead to inaccurate or unreasonable conclusions. And then there's also the potential for noise in our decisions, which is the undesirable variability in human judgment. So I'm going to go through a couple of examples of heuristics that are fairly common and are particularly relevant when we're thinking about weather warnings. So the first one is availability heuristic. So this is the tendency to use information that it comes easily to mind, is readily available to us when we're making decisions. And this could be because it's something that we've recently experienced, or because it's prominent in the media, or because it's something that we can see in front of us. But this isn't always the best way to make decisions, and it can lead to biased decision making. And a really nice example of this was when the film Jaws was released, which is amazingly 50 years ago now, so back in the 1970s. And because it was a very popular film, lots of people had either seen the full film or at least seen excerpts from it. There was this global epidemic of people being really scared to swim in the sea. And this was a heuristic people were using when they were making decisions about how to stay safe. Well, actually, the statistics show us that you're more likely to die of a falling coconut when visiting the seaside than you are from being attacked by a shark. So this is an example of where heuristics can lead to biased conclusions. And in terms of weather warnings, and thinking about meteorology and climate science more generally, the impacts of availability heuristic might be, for example, that we give undue influence to the vocal minority. It can also mean, and we know from research, that people who've been recently flooded are more likely to take action on receipt of a flood warning, which is great news for those who have prior experience, who will likely take action, but not so good for those who don't have any experience of being flooded. And they're the people that we need to particularly focus on and bear in mind. And it's also really bad news for unprecedented events when nobody will have had the experience of the sort of impacts that are potentially on the way. So we need to make sure that through our warning system, we're making the impacts really salient to people. And that could be, for example, by using imagery or perhaps video content to demonstrate what those impacts will look and, I guess more importantly, feel like for people. Another example of a heuristic is the framing effect, where our decisions are influenced by the way in which information is presented to us. And again, I've got a couple of examples here. The example on the right, I expect you've seen or heard similar messages before, and I've seen them in the US when there's very, very powerful hurricanes in the forecast. This was an example from Hurricane Milton, where the warning was, if you don't evacuate, you will die. And this is an extreme example of a loss framed message. And we use loss and gain framing quite a lot in advice that we put on our weather warnings. And in fact, we've done this piece of work. So the left-hand image is the Met Office warnings matrix. So it's impact versus likelihood to give us a box on the matrix and ultimately a colour for the warning. And we've turned that matrix into a behavioural framework recommending the way in which advice should be framed depending on where in the matrix the warning is. So I know the text is a little bit hard to see here, but I'll show some examples of how we frame the advice in a moment. But you can see that a red warning, which by definition is high likelihood of high impact, the suggestion is that we use a loss frame. So going back to that Hurricane Milton example of, if you don't take this action, there is the potential for a very bad consequence. Whereas for our lower likelihood or lower impact warnings, it might be that we choose to use a gain frame where we're saying, if you take this action, this good thing will happen as a result. So we've put that into practice, and here's an example from a real warning that was issued. This happens to be an amber snow warning. And so the first example is an example of a gain frame. And the text says, people cope better with power cuts when they have prepared for them in advance. It's easy to do. Consider gathering torches and batteries, a mobile phone power pack, and other essential items. So this is saying, if you do this relatively easy and straightforward thing, you are going to be more prepared in case of a power outage. And then we have another example of the use of kin and caring for others. So this is actually about pets. So it says, ensure pets are safe by keeping them warm and comfortable. And we know that framing on behalf of kin or others can be really beneficial. Another example that we use during heat warnings is make sure that your elderly relatives drink at least 2 litres of water per day. We find that people are more likely to act on behalf of others, but then there's a double win, which is that people then say, oh, well, I can see that that's useful for them. I should probably take that advice for myself as well. So I'm doing some research at the moment as part of my PhD, split into 3 main areas of research. The first is how operational meteorologists make decisions when issuing those impact-based warnings that I mentioned. And I'm also looking at the analysis of those advice statements I just described. So measuring how likely people are to take action before we started using those behaviourally informed advice statements, and afterwards, and seeing whether there's a measurable impact of that advice. And then thirdly, developing some messages for the UK Met Office's potential use of our relatively new government emergency alert system. So this is a cell broadcast system where notifications will pop up on your mobile phone using cell broadcast technology in the event of weather that is resulting in imminent threat to life in a defined geographical area. And you can imagine that there's lots of psychology and behavioural science involved in developing the most efficacious messages. So just to briefly go through some of that research, looking at the decision process of the meteorologist issuing warnings, here is another example of what the warnings look like when they're displayed on our website. So this was amber and red warnings for extreme heat back in summer of 2022. And because our warnings are impact-based, we're factoring in not just the meteorological hazard, but also the vulnerability and exposure of people who move about and of assets and infrastructure. So what that means is that we're factoring in not just meteorological data, but a whole host of other factors and considerations. And as part of my research, I've developed this table of the considerations and the factors that I've categorized of the considerations that meteorologists are making when issuing these impact-based warnings. So they're tending to start, as you might expect, with the numerical weather prediction data, as well as comparing that with real-time observations. But that's just the start of this process. They're then thinking about the population. Where are people? What are they doing? Is there anything going on that means there's increased travel, or there are lots of people gathered in one place? What will the impacts of this particular hazard be on people, assets, and infrastructure? So they're factoring in antecedent conditions, what's happened in the last few weeks, and any known vulnerabilities of maybe infrastructure such as road or bridge closures. Then they're thinking about the timings of the hazard and the impact, and the warning issue time and lead time. Then they're thinking about the position of the warning on the matrix and what does that imply? Does that lead to certain procedures being put in place? And then they're thinking about what might go wrong with this warning. How might it verify and people's perception of this warning in this particular situation? And will this warning have an impact on our brand reputation, for example? There's also a consideration of alignment with other agencies. So we work very closely with the Environment Agency via our Flood Forecasting Centre, and also the UK Health Security Agency and others. And then finally, the meteorologist will take a step back and think about how this warning fits into our overall communication strategy. So you can see that the decision process is really complex and multifaceted, and a lot of the information that's used is not data that's readily available, but it's tacit knowledge of experienced people who know things because they're in a particular part of the UK, or they have a lot of experience, or just by being a human in the world. So these are some examples of quotes taken from my research. This example in the top right of tacit knowledge, this meteorologist was describing how they factor in whether trees are in full leaf because of the time of year, because whether the trees are in full leaf or not during a wind event will impact the type of impacts that you see on the ground. They're looking at different models and whether they are in good agreement or not. They're also using their experience to assess model characteristics and different biases of different models that they use. There's also a lot of intuition and experience that is part of the decision process. This meteorologist was describing how they feel like they're relying on some sort of innate inbuilt sense borne out by years of experience. They were suggesting that perhaps that's a negative, but I like to think of it as a positive. That's why we still have humans in the decision-making process, using their experience and intuition based on their experience. Otherwise, we would just use raw model data and automate everything. So that's a summary of the research that I've been doing with the meteorologists issuing warnings. And then the rest of my research, as I mentioned, is really looking at response of the general public to our warnings. So this is research yet to be done, but I will be, as I've mentioned, comparing the action response of the general public before we used these specific advice statements and after we implemented that, and also developing some regulatory messages for our use of the government emergency alert system, which is when there are weather impacts that have imminent threat to life in a defined geographical area. And I've just put a couple of videos from this first one. Just bear with me while the ad plays. This first one is from subway flooding in New York, just showing the types of impacts that we're really concerned about here in the UK. And there was actually an example of this in the UK fairly recently, where there was flooding of an underground station as a result of severe convection. So we want to be sure that we are ready in case of these sorts of emergency scenarios, with messages that we can send out in a really timely manner to keep people safe. So that was a real quick run through of my research. And in summary, it's really clear that to achieve our purpose, human judgment and decision making needs to be better understood. And actually that meteorology and psychology have a lot in common, in the sense of they are both probabilistic sciences. So often meteorology is thought of as a very objective and quantitative science, but actually, of course, there's always uncertainty associated with a forecast. And so it has a lot in common with behavioural sciences, in that there is always uncertainty associated with it. And so I'll leave you with this quote from David Spiegelhalter, who is a statistician, who says that we can't avoid uncertainty, so we need to embrace it, be humbled by it, and even try to enjoy it. Thank you very much for listening. I think we probably don't have questions straight away, but always happy to be contacted if that sparked any thoughts or comments or queries, and looking forward to the panel discussion.
Thank you, Ellen, for this wonderful presentation. Please do watch on the question and answer chat. There are some questions that are expected after your presentation, so you may kindly respond. I think it's a very excellent presentation to set the context before the panel experts are going to speak on. I really like the process in which you have run through this entire, and how the overall the psychology and the metrologists have to think about what kind of information we are sending, and the 3 action point in terms of the weather warning process. You outlined that. Those are very important steps to be looked at very closely. I think this is something where such knowledge is not available in Global South in a way one would like to use that. This is something when the early warning for all initiatives are presenting to the countries, these are some recommendations that are very useful for them, in my opinion. I think you are also, again, stressed on the importance of how do we frame the messaging is very crucial. At what time, what kind of, how do we communicate that risk very closely beyond the data itself? That messaging, how emotionally that message is there, what are the bias we are going to address that part. And I think there is a degree of judgment that the meteorologists have to think closely how they are going to play an important role in issuing this timely and trusted warning. So I really liked all the key messages that have come out of that. I think these are something where we would be integrating in the synthesis report of this webinar series that we are. So we would count on your key messages as we go forward. So let me now drive into the other part of the segment, that's the panel experts. So let me first introduce all the panel experts, and then we have 2 rounds of quick rapid question which are predefined with the experts, and then we have an opportunities close to 10 minutes where the participants can ask directly the questions, or you can put forward your questions in the Q&A chat. Let me first introduce Dr. Animesh Kumar, head of the office in Bonn, United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction, briefly called UNDRR. And he leads the UNDRR's global portfolio on climate action, disaster data, and monitoring of the Sendai framework. He is championing that work, including the early warning for all. In the past, Animesh was the deputy head of the UNDRR regional office in Nairobi and in Bangkok, and also served in other UN entities in Africa and Asia. And by profession, he is a geographer and holds an MPhil and PhD in climate change and sustainability. And he is also the coordinating lead author of the Early Warning for All, for the flagship global status report that he is spearheading with the rest of the other partners. My second speaker is Senaka Basanaike, who is a program lead climate services at the Asian Disaster Preparedness Center with its headquarters in Bangkok. He has a vast experience in conducting research on severe weather events, which is very important to this webinar, and how the numerical weather models, including the simulations, can be analyzed from the point of short-term to the long-term climatological data and understanding the climate change and its variability to extreme event, including the work ADPC does on impact-based forecasting and many other work. So we are going to hear from Dr. Senaka. Then Dr. Lahiru, he is a convener, expert committee on planetary health and climate effects with the Sri Lanka Medical Association. He is a medical doctor by profession, specialized in public health and disaster management. He also brings 2 decades of ground level experience in managing public health emergencies in Sri Lanka, with special emphasis on dengue outbreak. We have done a joint collaboration on predicting a machine learning method in linking extreme precipitation forecast with the dengue spread in countries like Sri Lanka. And he also contributed to the development of numerous early warning protocols and disaster management plan, including the National Disaster Management Plan that he co-led with the other set of agencies in the country. Last but not least, Ms. Jani Chandramohan, psychologist, mental health and psychosocial support practitioner with the Save the Children. Janini comes with a mental health profession with over a decade of experience working with population affected by conflict and other crises. She currently serves as a senior technical advisor with the Save the Children when it comes to issues of mental health and psychosocial support. Without further delay, so you have seen the length of the experience that these experts hold. And what we have is a quick round of 2 round of technical experts input. One focus on precisely on the psychology, trust, and communication, which we heard from Helen. We want to hear from other organizations how they are exploring these aspects in the wide range of early warning segment. So I would like to ask first Dr. Animesh, the UNDRR has long emphasized on people-centered early warning systems. And then just with the global initiative of early warning for all, what are the biggest, the behavioral barriers to early warning uptake at the community level, and how we can really overcome this particular challenges? Over to you, Dr. Animesh.
Thanks, Dr. Giriraj, and thanks, hello colleagues, everyone. Good afternoon from Bonn. So what I would do in 5 minutes that I have, I'll try to give a global overview of where we are in terms of early warnings for all and the progress in the overview of early warning systems. So as Giriraj already mentioned, my office also releases the global flagship report on global status report on early warning systems. And we have just finalized the 4th edition of it, which will once again be launched at COP30 this time. And let me start with just some glimpses of where we are in terms of the progress. So the efficacy and effectiveness of early warning systems remains to be seen. We have long established that it has been containing mortality levels. Global mortality levels have declined by 50% in the last 2 decades or so. And the countries that have better early warning systems have at least 6 times lower mortality. So this report continues that narrative. We have also found that we are transitioning as we are 2.5 years when the UNSG announced the early warnings for all. The global number of countries that have officially reported early warning systems has increased. We're moving from glasses half full, half empty to half full now. 60% of countries have officially reported a presence of early warning systems. And within the countries that reported or have been reporting, the scores of early warning comprehensiveness have increased by 45% since officially reporting began. And this actually has doubled in the least developed countries. But the least developed countries and Africa still remain way behind the global average. Now, with these some headline figures, let me drill down to the local level, to the community level. And that's where we start really seeing the behavioral barriers to early warning dissemination and the action that follows. I would want to reiterate that all of us know that early warning systems work as a value chain, and this value chain is only as effective, as strong as the weakest link. And we have seen that the weakest link often happens to be at the last mile, at the community level, which is where the early warning system chain, value system chain, the information link breaks down. We have done reasonably well in the upstream side of early warning systems, so the collection of risk information, observation and monitoring and dissemination, but we haven't done as well on the downstream side, which is the backflow of information to the communities. And that side remains very patchy. In the last year's report on global status, we had found and used the World Risk Poll by the Lloyds Foundation, which has found that in 2023, 30% of the people globally who experienced a disaster in the last 5 years received no warning. And this figure has remained consistent over their last two surveys, which was the previous one before that was in 2021. And they have found significant inequalities. For example, countries and people in Central Asia, Northern Africa, Central and West Africa, people in particular living in the rural areas, people who are less educated, lowest levels of household which have access to finance resources to be the limited ones. So there are multiple areas where they have found some common factors in terms of the received and action on early warning system. So we have analyzed all the information and found that there are three key issues that kind of portray and pose in themselves as barriers to behavioral aspects. One is understanding of risk. Often the perception of risk is shaped by what people have seen in the past, and this induces a cognitive bias to the hazard. People act on based on what they see, not based on what is forthcoming. And this is something which we have observed to be a real challenge in terms of ensuring that the experiences that they have gained in the past may be useful, but may not always be useful. Why? Two reasons. One, the complexity of risk is growing. I just saw on the Q&A chat box, somebody from Turkey has posted a question that areas which had never had snowstorms are having snowstorms now. So the risk is becoming more complex and the people are just not there to have the right reaction because the risks are becoming more and more unconventional. A second part of this is that hazards themselves are behaving very differently compared to how each hazardous event would be different compared to what they had in the past. So this cognitive bias that people have, that when they react to something they have seen or they react based on what they have observed in the past, has been a key issue in terms of the way they react against early warning system. The second barrier that we have seen is in the trust in the system itself, the public trust, which are the behaviors towards warning, which are often influenced by public trust towards the system. And we have seen this from two angles, that either there are too many warnings and there are cancellations in sometimes. It often leads to compromising the trust that the public have because it's a wolf cry and people don't trust every time early warning is issued. On the other hand, there is also sometimes a false sense of security. The systems exist, but the action is to be taken by the people. And once sometimes people feel that if the authorities are there, the systems are there for early warning, they seem protected. But if they don't take action, the whole early warning value chain breaks down there. And this is applicable for both sudden onset events like tsunami, where self-evacuation is the only option, or even for slow onset disasters like drought, which often can be managed just by adapting better. So this system, in terms of the cognitive bias on the one side and the sense of security that people have based on early warning systems, which is the trust element, seems to be some of the couple of barriers. But the third important thing that we have often ignored is what will induce collective action among the communities. In particular, we have seen that in urban areas, the social capital among the communities remains very low. The more people have direct access to resources, the less they have the propensity to collaborate. And the less they have propensity to do collective action, the less community action will take place. And the less community action takes place, the response to early warning will remain limited. So people often don't invest when we work on early warning systems. We often don't invest enough in generating and inducing social capital, which will help communities act when the early warnings are triggered. Now, based on these barriers, the report this year has issued some key recommendations. We are making a very strong call for people-centered, locally led approaches to enable effective early action through effective communication and public dialogue. We really acknowledge that there is a digital divide, and if warnings have to reach everyone, everywhere, a multi-channel approach is needed. And this needs a mix of high-tech, low-tech, no-tech solutions and traditional knowledge systems so that people can take action based on what they hear. A second recommendation we have made is in terms of ensuring that stakeholder engagement and data sharing support collaboration. There has to be an all of society approach, and we need better evidence base to inform this, including through better investment in data. And the third one that we have strongly recommended, this is more for the governments to take action on. We have found that the countries that have better governance system have more comprehensive early warning systems. And this is something we have recommended more at the local level so that the multi-hazard early warning system capabilities are more invested in through a governance approach and not through a projectized approach of early warning. So with these recommendations, maybe I'll stop there and happy to take further questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Animesh. We'll come back. These are excellent points that have come. Specifically, you talked about all the barriers and key recommendations. I would not repeat again, but I think following to what Animesh said, and I would now call upon Dr. Senaka. I think ADPC has been doing pioneering work in preparedness across the disaster management cycle. And often the information flow is very critical across all the pillars. So how do you see that across this risk management, the trust and perception influencing how people are responding to early warning? Maybe you can pick up some case study and you can highlight that for the next 3 to 4 minutes, and then we will have a second round. We'll come back on that. Over to you.
Thanks, Dr. Giriraj. Good evening from Colombo. Yes, you are rightly, as you have mentioned, Asian Disaster Preparedness Center. We have been working with the region on this climate services, helping the governments to improve their systems, in particular the early warning system, referring to today's discussion. So ADPC strategy 2030 is heavily guided by 3 core principles, which is science, systems, and applications to build resilience in the region. And over the years, more than 3 decades now, we have been working in the region. So we have been helping across all the layers, meaning that national, subnational, and today's discussion more on like the community level as well. So to improve this, the systems, early warning systems. So in the recent past, we started, adopting or helping the countries to develop impact-based forecasting, in particular Vietnam, Laos, PDR, and Cambodia, with the support from UN agencies as well as other development partners. Currently, we are working in Sri Lanka to improve the system with Department of Meteorology. Thereby, it leads to, of course, improving climate services. Early warning is also part of that. So regarding the trust and perception, I think Dr. Animesh already touched base. I think the first thing that I would like to highlight is the credibility of the source of information and warning. So for that, we need to improve the capacity or the technical capacity as well as human capacity of the source agencies, which is mainly the National Meteorological Hydrological Organizations as well as the National Disaster Management Organizations. So then, otherwise maybe the people used to listen to or believe to those, the information or the warnings coming from those, that type of organization. So it's important, as I was mentioning earlier, to first improve the systems, not only the forecast information generation, but the dissemination related activities, which helped for the communities to act on that. That's the first thing I think I would say regarding the trust. And the perception, it has a sort of like, very different aspects, I would say. When it comes to community, the perception is the community often judge warning based on prior outcomes of the historical events. So as Dr. Animesh also mentioned that, for example, a false alarm can reduce compliance next time, the next event. So again, the improved forecasting system and the proper communication to a grassroots level is important. As I was mentioning a while ago, we have been working in the region and then supporting this in organization across all the levels, from national to community level, to improve this, the perception. The second thing is, socio cultural settings in the context, in particular Asian countries. So if you go to African regions, maybe the same. So beliefs, trust in traditional knowledge and social hierarchies affect how warnings are interpreted. For example, in our experience in the past, we used to work with whenever we go to the communities, we used to work with the community leaders and then listen to them and then sit with them and then design the system. That's also very much important to improve, perception, so that maybe they will, act on that. And in doing so, for example, like drills and simulations are part of that with the communities, so that regularly they will understand the risk perspective, as well as the tabletop simulations is also important for the local communities or the local authority for them to work on that and act on that. And then personal relevance is so important. If a person, some people takes as a low risk, because if that person had previous experience or survived the previous storm, so he or she may not be taking sort of like seriously in the next event or so. So that's the way that we should be educating through this that awareness raising. It's also important. So the recommendation is to improve the or strengthen trust.
We can come back to the second round a bit more on the recommendation side. I think what can offer here, but now let me call upon Dr. Lahiru. I think the question is very similar to your organization as well. At the end of the day, as a professional by doctor, we have to look at how this technology, the so-called early warning system, need to have better integrate or incorporate the social and the cultural context to make sure that we saw what happened in COVID, how we had to trigger a faster action. So a disease like dengue or any form of water-related disaster, what do you think the key takeaway that you would like to hear say for us? Very briefly, 3 minutes, and then we can go to the second round. Yeah, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Degriyaj. Good evening, everyone from Colombo. Yes, echoing on the what previous colleagues have already mentioned, I think before going into social and cultural context, it's always like in a more humanized angle, it's always good to have some understand the individual constructs behind understanding early warning message. So let me highlight some of the key factors that a person would use to understand early warning message. For example, one would be the perceived susceptibility, whether this particular hazard has a sort of a relation to the individual. So always a human or a person will look into the perceived susceptibility of this particular hazard. That is one construct. Second construct would be the perceived severity, especially as you mentioned in case of a biological outbreak. Like person will weigh in whether this is a sort of a severe, sort of which has a severe consequences, or it's a sort of a very mild or more mild to moderate consequence disease. So he or she will weigh on the perceived severity as well. Then the third individual construct that we have to look into when we are sort of designing early warning messages are the perceived barriers, like whether this person will perceive some barriers in converting this message into action, whether there are barriers physically, whether there are barriers financially, whether there are barriers economically and socially. For the fourth one would be the perceived benefit, whether there is any benefit individually to this person or his family or his community. That will also be weighed upon when we construct early warning messages and when we disseminate early warning messages for communities. They will always sort of weigh on the perceived benefits. So perceived susceptibility, perceived severity, perceived barriers, and perceived benefits. Those are the four main constructs, individual constructs, that one could sort of think about when we are designing early warning messages for communities. The fifth most important one is clues for action. People will always, as a social animal, people will always look into your family, your friends, your colleagues, and your peers, whether they are following this particular early warning message. They will always look for clues. They will always look for clues for action. So if we can understand these five constructs, individual constructs, then we can almost always understand the social and cultural constructs after that, right? Because these constructs will be modified or influenced by our social constructs, our cultural constructs, and also some of the psychological variables, as Dr. Helen highlighted, right? So it's always understanding this, whether we have particularly understood a particular community under these constructs, particular individual under these constructs when we are developing early warning messages. If we can sort of address the susceptibility, if we can address the severity and also barriers and benefits, and also if we can identify some of the clues, perhaps from previous experiences on this particular hazard, right? Then we can actually culturally and socially construct our messages. If we don't understand these individual constructs and culturally or socially sort of adapt our messages, it's only be a translation of into another language or translation into another culture. So it's very important in a humanized angle that we understand these constructs.
Yeah, very clear, and thank you for messaging that. I would love to put those five strategy, which will you may use the chat box also to type, or you have any publications or report that you can share to the experts here. In the first round, we have the last speaker, Ms. Janini Chandramohan, Save the Children International. As a psychologist, have you come across any people from this cyclones, landslides? Sri Lanka is known to all these problems. How do you see this trauma and stress experiences, specifically how it is affecting the individuals, especially children's and caregivers, because that's a key focus of Save the Children, and how you plan to interpret and act on those warnings? So over to you now.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the question. So I'll build from our previous speakers, especially from Dr. Senekar and Dr. Lahiru, speaking on sort of the traditional, the cultural methods and the health belief model. So sort of to answer this question through a mental health psychosocial lens, let's look at it from a psychological perspective as well as the social factors, how it influences the individual and how they interpret and respond to these warnings and how they sort of respond in crisis situation itself. So often when people sort of live through disasters or prolonged or chronic stress, their body often sort of responds in a very survival response kind of mechanism where it's, I think all of us would have heard the fight, flight, freeze way of our body reacting. So some you would see how they would go into a hyperarousal or very sensitive to these alerts or the news of a particular crisis that could take place where they become extremely sort of fearful. They may be very fast to sort of flee the environment. They might start shouting or alerting the neighborhood, creating more panic. Some could go into avoidance. Some could be like, I cannot deal with this again. What is the point of doing this again, over and over again? And some could also go into sort of a very sort of a numbing freeze kind of response where they sort of shut down and they feel the emotions very drastically and are unable to sort of cope at that very moment. So when we sort of look at how they respond to early warning systems, that's sort of the psychological perspective. I mean, if we have time, we can go into how sort of the brain and the neurosystem really works on it, but I will keep it short. But also definitely sort of the second point I would like to sort of emphasize is their past experience or their lived experience. It could be that their repeated exposure to sort of overestimated early warnings that could create in sort of alert fatigue, learned helplessness, where they feel like, okay, it didn't happen so badly last time, so maybe it won't happen again this time. It could even be sort of how well the coordinated mechanism, sort of the referral mechanism or the service providers worked the previous time. Were their promises sort of met? Were the follow-ups through, or was there like a break of trust that also sort of contributes to these things? And as well as sort of misinterpretation of communication. So it could be that the communication itself wasn't very clear, it wasn't age appropriate, it wasn't in the local languages, it wasn't friendly towards persons with disabilities, but it could also be very sort of cultural in a way, where people could sort of, I mean, you have these hearsay kind of passings among the community, right? For example, one of my colleagues, Rangana, was talking about how in some parts of the country there are communities who would believe that on the 45th day after New Year there would be floods. So sort of those cultural, traditional sort of thinking also sort of plays a role in this sort of setting. And to sort of address quickly on how the caregiver and child relationship works, I'll quickly maybe give a scenario and explain it through that. It could be a single mother of two living in a community where they often experience, I'll use floods for this example, where she experienced loss of a loved one and also perhaps loss of a house. And this time around, when she hears the siren, she goes into sort of shut down, helpless mode, where she feels like, what is the point? Nothing that I do is going to work, So it almost feels like she doesn't respond to it in the way that the disseminations or the preparedness sort of worked, right? Mm-hmm. And the kids also, and that comes purely from sort of helplessness and the past distress that she felt. And often the children also tend to mirror the caregivers at this point. And they would, whether they take the situation seriously or lightly, comes from sort of what they observe from the adults. And it also comes from, if the adult is panicking and anxious, they'll probably mirror the same. And if the adult is being composed and say, okay, these are the instructions, this is the step by step, this is how we're going to feel, this is how we're going to sort of respond, then it becomes
Yeah. Thanks, Janani. I think it's quite a great insights from the work you are all doing that. Before I go to the round two, given the limited time, I just want to hear one or two experts, one or two panelists who could have any questions to our experts. Please raise your hand if you have any direct questions to our experts, because you have been spending a lot of time today with us, and Friday is not easy day to take your hours with us. So any question to our expert? Let me wait for a few seconds. If you raise your hand, I'm happy to pass on the mic. Okay, no questions from our participants. Okay. So while if you have any questions, feel free to share it in the Q&A segment. So what I will do is the next rapid fire, it could be, because we have got 6 minutes or so. So I would suggest 1 minute per experts now. I'm cutting down from 3 minutes to 1 minute in the interest of summarizing that. And I also want to give the last floor to Helen if you have any messaging you want to give to the participants. So let me start with Animesh. So I'm not going to repeat the questions, but any key messages you could give it in a 1 minute. Likewise, we go on a sequence and then we'll try to wrap up. Over to you, Animesh.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, we are left with exactly a month from when the COP13 will start. And time is very ripe to ensure that early warning is seen to be a very strong unifying agenda. It is the 7th target of the Sendai framework. It is one of the targets of the global goal adaptation. It is part of the Article 8 of loss and damage in the Paris Agreement. This is something which we really need to harness to ensure that the national processes on early warning systems are made much more coherent, because as of now, they're scattered between disaster risk reduction plans and national adaptation plans. So a bottom-up approach at this point of time, using community knowledge, their emotional intelligence would be of utmost importance while we move forward towards coherent approaches to early warning system.
Very quick and very selective words to use it in the key messages for our participants. Over to Senaka now.
Yeah, thanks, Raj. So I would say that, let me take this IBF as we have been discussing so far. So IBF, I would say that, I would like to present as a subset of this overall climate services. And that's actually a sort of like paradigm shift, what the weather will be to what the weather will do. So it's kind of like related to the topic that we have been discussing so far, the trust as well as perception. If you can improve the IBF systems, which needs sort of like, this information at the ground level, the community level, it's easy to say, but hard to do it. But if you can do it, so that maybe we can really, strengthen trust as well as the perception, because we bring local knowledge, experience, and then vulnerability mapping, risk mapping, exposure mapping, and then we can improve this in IBF, and then we can, of course, strengthen trust as well as perception. Thanks.
Thank you. Now over to Dr. Lahiru.
Yeah, Dr. Riach, my message would be to sort of capitalize on trust across the settings. Like if you consider a community, we have schools, we have religious places, we have healthcare facilities. In all these settings, we have a trusted personality or a community champion. So we have to capitalize on these community champions and trust element when we develop early warning messages. And also we are sort of in the middle of developing highly sophisticated early warning systems. We are sort of losing the element of human in most of the early warning systems. So always when we design early warning systems, it is our responsibility to think early warning systems as living systems. If we consider early warning as a living system, I think we will not lose the human element in the early warning system.
Great. Thank you. Now, Ms. Jenny.
Yeah, thank you so much. So building on the last words of human element, what I'd like to say is, I think when developing early warning systems, it's essential that we do look at integrating mental health, psychosocial, the lens of MHPSS into it, through evidence-based sort of models, integrating it into messaging, integrating it into who the messenger is, and its practices, but also sort of involving from children, young persons, and the community itself in building these early warning systems, as well as the messaging, so that they own it, and they'll be also able to sort of be peer supporters in the community to sort of really take this through, and also use sort of familiar creative methods, not necessarily only sort of posters, whatnot, but even like performing arts and art, etc. So yeah, I'll stop there. Thanks so much.
Thank you. But yeah, I'm not going to summarize now at this point, given the limited time, but I think the practical part of, if you look at the 4 pillars of early warning, I think in a way, this particular topic is not just seen in specific pillar, but it has to be cross-cutting across all the pillars we have to look. Now, how much I just want to ask this question, a minute we have still. How do you really see this, the financing is happening on this kind of a topic? Because it's quite neglected. People think that every community understand very well. The psychology, trust, and all that. Is there a set of donors are serious about this kind of a piece of work? Any specific insights from any one of you, and then some 30 seconds to Helen to say anything you hear from the perspective from the presentations you have done. Anybody would like to say on the financing side of these topics? Yeah, please, Animesh.
Yeah. Perhaps I would strongly recommend that the financing options in the current day world are emerging under the loss and damage space of climate action. The Santiago Network for Loss and Damage is fully operational and is open for business for communities to access for technical assistance, including on early warning systems. Yesterday, the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage concluded its 7th board meeting and has come out with a Barbados implementation modality with $250 million opened up, with 50% of it will be for LDCs and SIDS. So there are new options emerging, and it will be a matter of project pipelines being developed by the community-based organizations so that they can better access the financing. If anybody is more interested on this topic, happy to share more information. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, over to you, Ellen. The exciting information from all the experts. You have 30 seconds to you now. Over to you. Anything you would like to say now? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I've learned a lot. It's been a fascinating hour. I wish it could have been longer. I love those 5 individual constructs. I think they're really useful. I love what Jenny said about fight, flight, freeze, and the danger of overwarning, because people might either ignore the warning if they feel that they're being warned and nothing is happening, or the reverse, where people feel that constant psychological unease because of this, pervasive warning that seems to be ever present. So I think that was a really important point. And just to sort of reiterate the purpose of this session, which is to really showcase, I think, the huge benefits that we see when we work across disciplines, and in this particular case, at the intersection of the physical and social sciences, and how important that is in everything we do. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ellen. And again, thanks to all the speakers and panel experts for joining us, and also importantly, all the participants for staying with us. And we look forward to see you in the another series that's happening as part of the Eyes on the Storm series. Thank you. So have a good weekend and see you all some other time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.